Silk is a natural protein fiber, some forms of which can be woven into textiles. The protein fiber of silk is composed mainly of fibroin and is produced by certain insect larvae to form cocoons. The best-known silk is obtained from the cocoons of the larvae of the mulberry silkworm Bombyx mori reared in captivity. The shimmering appearance of silk is due to the triangular prism-like structure of the silk fiber, which allows silk cloth to refract incoming light at different angles, thus producing different colors. Silk is produced by several insects, but generally only the silk of moth caterpillars has been used for textile manufacturing. There has been some research into other types of silk which differ at the molecular level. Silk is mainly produced by the larvae of insects undergoing complete metamorphosis, but some adult insects such as web spinners also produce silk, and some insects such as raspy crickets produce silk throughout their lives. Silk production also occurs in Hymenoptera, silverfish, mayflies, thrips, leafhoppers, beetles, lacewings, fleas, flies, and midges. Other types of arthropod produce silk, most notably various arachnids such as spiders. Etymology. The word silk comes from Old English Cyrillic, from Greek sigma eta rho iota kappa omicron sigma syrikos, silken, ultimately from an Asian source. History. Wild silk. Several kinds of wild silk, which it produced by caterpillars other than the mulberry silkworm, have been known and used in China, South Asia, and Europe since ancient times. However, the scale of production was always far smaller than for cultivated silks. There are several reasons for this. First, they differ from the domesticated varieties in color and texture and are therefore less uniform. Second, cocoons gathered in the wild have usually had the pupa emerge from them before being discovered, so the silk thread that makes up the cocoon has been torn into shorter lengths. And third, many wild cocoons are covered in a mineral layer that stymies attempts to reel from them long strands of silk. Thus, previously, the only way to obtain silk suitable for spinning into textiles in areas where commercial silks are not cultivated was by tedious and labor-intensive carding. Commercial silks originate from reared silkworm pupae, which are bred to produce a white-colored silk thread with no mineral on the surface. The pupae are killed by either dipping them in boiling water before the adult moths emerge or by piercing them with a needle. These factors all contribute to the ability of the whole cocoon to be unraveled as one continuous thread, permitting a much stronger cloth to be woven from the silk. Wild silks also tend to be more difficult to dye than silk from the cultivated silkworm. A technique known as demineralizing allows the mineral layer around the cocoon of wild silk moths to be removed, leaving only variability in color as a barrier to creating a commercial silk industry based on wild silks in the parts of the world where wild silk moths thrive, such as in Africa and South America. Genetic modification of domesticated silkworms is used to facilitate the production of more useful types of silk. China silk fabric was first developed in ancient China. The earliest example of silk fabric is from 3630 BC, and it was used as wrapping for the body of a child from a Yangshao site in Qingtai-kun at Xinjiang, Henan. Legend gives credit for developing silk to a Chinese empress, Liege. Silks were originally reserved for the emperors of China for their own use and gifts to others, but spread gradually through Chinese culture and trade, both geographically and socially, and then to many regions of Asia. Because of its texture and luster, silk rapidly became a popular luxury fabric in the many areas accessible to Chinese merchants. Silk was in great demand, and became a staple of pre-industrial international trade. In July 2007, archaeologists discovered intricately woven and dyed silk textiles in a tomb in Jiangxi province. dated to the Eastern Zhou dynasty roughly 2,500 years ago. Although historians have suspected a long history of a formative textile industry in ancient China, this find of silk textiles employing complicated techniques of weaving and dyeing provides direct evidence for silks dating before the Nwangdui discovery and other silks dating to the Han Dynasty. Silk is described in a chapter on mulberry planting by Si Shengji of the Western Han. There is a surviving calendar for silk production in an Eastern Han document. The two other known works on silk from the Han period are lost. The first evidence of the long-distance silk trade is the finding of silk in the hair of an Egyptian mummy of the 21st dynasty, c. 1070 BC. The silk trade reached as far as the Indian subcontinent, the Middle East, Europe, and North Africa. This trade was so extensive that the major set of trade routes between Europe and Asia came to be known as the Silk Road. The emperors of China strove to keep knowledge of sericulture secret to maintain the Chinese monopoly. Nonetheless, sericulture reached Korea with technological aid from China around 200 BC, the ancient kingdom of Khotan by AD 50, and India by AD 140. In the ancient era, silk from China was the most lucrative and sought-after luxury item traded across the Eurasian continent, and many civilizations, such as the ancient Persians, benefited economically from trade. Chinese silk-making process. The silkworms and mulberry leaves are placed on trays. Twig frames for the silkworms are prepared. The cocoons are weighed. The cocoons are soaked and the silk is wound on spools. The silk is woven using a loom. India silk has a long history in India. It is known as Paat in eastern India, Patu in southern parts of India, and Resham in North India. Recent archaeological discoveries in Harappa and Chanhudaro suggest that sericulture, employing wild silk threads from native silkworm species, existed in South Asia during the time of the Indus Valley Civilization dating between 2450 BC and 2000 BC, while hard and fast evidence for silk production in China dates back to around 2570 BC. Sheila Vainker, a silk expert at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, who sees evidence for silk production in China significantly earlier than 2500–2000 BC, suggests people of the Indus civilization either harvested silkworm cocoons or traded with people who did, and that they knew a considerable amount about silk. India is the second largest producer of silk in the world after China. About 97% of the raw silk comes from 5 Indian states, namely, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Jammu and Kashmir, Tamil Nadu and West Bengal. North Bangalore, the upcoming site of a $20 million silk city, Ramanagara and Mysore, contribute to a majority of silk production in Karnataka. In Tamil Nadu, mulberry cultivation is concentrated in the Coimbatore, Erode, Tirupur, Salem and Dharmapuri districts. Hyderabad, Andhra Pradesh, and Gobi Shettipalayam, Tamil Nadu, were the first locations to have automated silk reeling units in India. India is also the largest consumer of silk in the world. The tradition of wearing silk saris for marriages and other auspicious ceremonies is a custom in Assam and southern parts of India. Silk is considered to be a symbol of royalty, and, historically, silk was used primarily by the upper classes. Silk garments and saris produced in Kanchipuram, Poshampally, Dharmavaram, Mysore, Arani in the south, Benares in the north, and Murshidabad in the east are well recognized. In the northeastern state of Assam, 3 different types of silk are produced, collectively called Assam silk: Mugga, Eri and Pat silk. Mugga, the golden silk, and Eri are produced by silkworms that are native only to Assam. Thailand silk is produced year-round in Thailand by 2 types of silkworms, the cultured Bombycidae and wild Saturniidae. Most production is after the rice harvest in the southern and northeastern parts of the country. Women traditionally weave silk on hand looms and pass the skill on to their daughters. as weaving is considered to be a sign of maturity and eligibility for marriage. Thai silk textiles often use complicated patterns in various colors and styles. Most regions of Thailand have their own typical silks. A single thread filament is too thin to use on its own, so women combine many threads to produce a thicker, usable fiber. They do this by hand reeling the threads onto a wooden spindle to produce a uniform strand of raw silk. The process takes around 40 hours to produce a half kilogram of silk. Many local operations use a reeling machine for this task, but some silk threads are still hand-reeled. The difference is that hand-reeled threads produce 3 grades of silk. 2 fine grades that are ideal for lightweight fabrics, and a thick grade for heavier material. The silk fabric is soaked in extremely cold water and bleached before dyeing to remove the natural yellow coloring of Thai silk yarn. To do this, skeins of silk thread are immersed in large tubs of hydrogen peroxide. Once washed and dried, the silk is woven on a traditional hand-operated loom. Ancient Mediterranean in the Odyssey, 19.233, when Odysseus, while pretending to be someone else, is questioned by Penelope about her husband's clothing. He says that he wore a shirt, gleaming like the skin of a dried onion, which could refer to the lustrous quality of silk fabric. The Roman Empire knew of and traded in silk, and Chinese silk was the most highly priced luxury good imported by them. During the reign of Emperor Tiberius, sumptuary laws were passed that forbade men from wearing silk garments, but these proved ineffectual. Despite the popularity of silk, the secret of silk making only reached Europe around AD 550, via the Byzantine Empire. Legend has it that monks working for the Emperor Justinian I smuggled silkworm eggs to Constantinople in hollow canes from China. All top-quality looms and weavers were located inside the Great Palace complex in Constantinople, and the cloth produced was used in imperial robes or in diplomacy, as gifts to foreign dignitaries. The remainder was sold at very high prices. Middle East in the Torah, a scarlet cloth item called in Hebrew, sheni tola, literally, crimson of the worm, is described as being used in purification ceremonies, such as those following a leprosy outbreak, alongside cedar wood and hyssop. Eminent scholar and leading medieval translator of Jewish sources and books of the Bible into Arabic, Rabbi Saadia Gaon, translates this phrase explicitly as crimson silk. In Islamic teachings, Muslim men are forbidden to wear silk. There are disputes regarding the amount of silk a fabric can consist of for it to be lawful for men to wear, but the dominant opinion of most Muslim scholars is that the wearing of silk by men is forbidden. Modern attire has raised a number of issues, including, for instance, the permissibility of wearing silk neckties, which are masculine articles of clothing. Despite injunctions against silk for men, silk has retained its popularity in the Islamic world because of its permissibility for women, and due to the presence of non-Muslim communities. The Muslim Moors brought silk with them to Spain during their conquest of the Iberian Peninsula. Medieval and modern Europe. Italy was the most important producer of silk during the medieval age. The first center to introduce silk production to Italy was the city of Catanzaro during the 11th century in the region of Calabria. The silk of Catanzaro supplied almost all of Europe and was sold in a large market fair in the port of Reggio Calabria, to Spanish, Venetian, Genovese and Dutch merchants. Catanzaro became the lace capital of the world, with a large silkworm breeding facility that produced all the laces and linens used in the Vatican. The city was world famous for its fine fabrication of silks, velvets, damasks and brocades. Another notable center was the Italian city-state of Lucca, which largely financed itself through silk production and silk trading, beginning in the 12th century. Other Italian cities involved in silk production were Genoa, Venice and Florence. The silk exchange in Valencia from the 15th century, where previously in 1348 also perxle was traded as some kind of silk, illustrates the power and wealth of one of the great Mediterranean mercantile cities. Silk was produced in and exported from the province of Granada, Spain, especially the Alpujarras region, until the Moriscos, whose industry it was, were expelled from Granada in 1571. Since the 15th century, silk production in France has been centered around the city of Lyon, where many mechanic tools for mass production were first introduced in the 17th century. James I attempted to establish silk production in England, purchasing and planting 100,000 mulberry trees, some on land adjacent to Hampton Court Palace, but they were of a species unsuited to the silkworms, and the attempt failed. In 1732 John Gardevalio set up a silk-throwing enterprise at Logwood Mill in Stockport. In 1744, Burton Mill was erected in Macclesfield, and in 1753 Old Mill was built in Congleton. These three towns remained the centre of the English silk-throwing industry until silk-throwing was replaced by silk waste spinning. British enterprise also established silk filature in Cyprus in 1928. In England in the mid-20th century, raw silk was produced at Lullingstone Castle in Kent. Silkworms were raised and reared under the direction of Zoe Lady Hartdyke. Production started elsewhere later. Medieval and modern Europe. Dress made from silk. Bed covered with silk. A 100-year-old pattern of silk called Almgrenz-Rosen. The necktie originates from the cravat, a neckband made from silk. North America. King James I introduced silk growing to the American colonies around 1619, ostensibly to discourage tobacco planting. The Shakers in Kentucky adopted the practice. In the 19th century, a new attempt at a silk industry began with European-born workers in Paterson, New Jersey, and the city became a silk center in the United States. Manchester, Connecticut emerged as center of the silk industry in America from the late 19th through the mid-20th century. The Cheney Brothers Historic District showcases Mills refurbished his apartments and includes nearby museums. World War II interrupted the silk trade from Asia, and silk prices increased dramatically. U.S. industry began to look for substitutes, which led to the use of synthetics such as nylon. Synthetic silks have also been made from lyocell, a type of cellulose fiber, and are often difficult to distinguish from real silk. Malaysia in Terengganu, which is now part of Malaysia. A second generation of silkworm was being imported as early as 1764 for the country's silk textile industry, especially songket. However, since the 1980s, Malaysia is no longer engaged in sericulture but does plant mulberry trees. Vietnam. In Vietnamese legend, silk appeared in the 6th dynasty of Hung Vuong. Production process. The entire production process of silk can be divided into several steps which are typically handled by different entities. Extracting raw silk starts by cultivating the silkworms on mulberry leaves. Once the worms start pupating in their cocoons, these are dissolved in boiling water in order for individual long fibers to be extracted and fed into the spinning reel. Properties. Physical properties. Silk fibers from the Bombyx mori silkworm have a triangular cross-section with rounded corners, 5 to 10 micrometers wide. The fibroin heavy chain is composed mostly of beta sheets, due to a 59-mer amino acid repeat sequence with some variations. The flat surfaces of the fibrils reflect light at many angles, giving silk a natural sheen. The cross-section from other silkworms can vary in shape and diameter. Crescent light for Anophy and elongated wedge for Tusa. Silkworm fibers are naturally extruded from two silkworm glands as a pair of primary filaments, which are stuck together with serous proteins that act like glue, to form a bava. Bava diameters for Tusa silk can reach 65 micrometers. See cited reference for cross-sectional SEM photographs. Silk has a smooth, soft texture that is not slippery, unlike many synthetic fibers. Silk is one of the strongest natural fibers, but it loses up to 20% of its strength when wet. It has a good moisture regain of 11%. Its elasticity is moderate to poor. If elongated even a small amount, it remains stretched. It can be weakened if exposed to too much sunlight. It may also be attacked by insects, especially if left dirty. One example of the durable nature of silk over other fabrics is demonstrated by the recovery in 1840 of silk garments from a wreck of 1782. The most durable article found has been silk, for besides pieces of cloaks and lace, a pair of black satin breeches and a large satin waistcoat with flaps were got up, of which the silk was perfect, but the lining entirely gone, from the thread giving way. No articles of dress of woolen cloth have yet been found. Silk is a poor conductor of electricity and thus susceptible to static cling. Unwashed silk chiffon may shrink up to 8% due to a relaxation of the fiber macrostructure. So silk should either be washed prior to garment construction, or dry cleaned. Dry cleaning may still shrink the chiffon up to 4%. Occasionally, this shrinkage can be reversed by a gentle steaming with a press cloth. There is almost no gradual shrinkage nor shrinkage due to molecular level deformation. Natural and synthetic silk is known to manifest piezoelectric properties in proteins, probably due to its molecular structure. Silkworm silk was used as the standard for the denier, a measurement of linear density in fibers. Silkworm silk therefore has a linear density of approximately 1 den, or 1.1 d-tex. Chemical properties. Silk emitted by the silkworm consists of two main proteins, sericin and fibroin, fibroin being the structural center of the silk, and sericin being the sticky material surrounding it. Fibroin is made up of the amino acids glycer, gliala, gliala and forms beta-pleated sheets. Hydrogen bonds form between chains, and side chains form above and below the plane of the hydrogen bond network. The high proportion of glycine allows tight packing. This is because glycine's R group is only a hydrogen and so is not as sterically constrained. The addition of alanine and serine makes the fibers strong and resistant to breaking. This tensile strength is due to the many interseeded hydrogen bonds, and when stretched the force is applied to these numerous bonds and they do not break. Silk is resistant to most mineral acids, except for sulfuric acid, which dissolves it. It is yellowed by perspiration. Chlorine bleach will also destroy silk fabrics.